But I think this area, Will, we've talked about it in terms of empowering people with data, the digital citizen. It brings all that in. And I think this smart water home could be really interesting. I just wonder if there is the appetite for it on water. I mean, I know on power. Sorry, that's the chime of my local ice cream man. Bang on the time.
Oh,
a bit of an
what are you going to get?
I can get you guys cornettos. I'll run out and be back in a couple of minutes, right? No,
Sounds great.
Well, hello and welcome to The Stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation with guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg, an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarni, a water strategy consultant working to do my part to solve wicked water problems.
And today we're going to focus on 4 major water trends. So to start with, atmospheric water generation, literally harnessing water from the air. Then we're going to talk a bit about material science, looking at the wonder material of graphene and ceramics. Then we're going to look at digital and the use of satellite technology before finishing on the smart water home. And I'm delighted to say our guest this week for episode 6 is Imran Jafarey, a water technology expert and the former chief commercial officer of Nanostone Water. Imran, come in.
Hello, gentlemen. Great to be here this afternoon with you. I'm really looking forward to a interesting and hopefully challenging conversation about some of these topics, because
of course,
I appreciate fun. The opinions of this team. And fun, of course. Cheers.
That's a good way to start. Cheers. Nice.
Yeah.
We always start with a little bit of light-hearted banter about the shirts. So I feel like we should kind of continue with that theme. What would you call that number, Imran?
This is a, I don't know what color this is. My wife could be more precise. I would call it a purple, but a light lilac, lavender perhaps, with a floral print. It's as close to a Hawaiian shirt as I have. And I chose not to go shopping for this call. So, yeah.
That's a good decision. And Will?
Wait a minute, I think the call's over.
We're going to finish already. Will, that is perhaps my favorite shirt that you've worn so far out of 6 episodes.
Well, thank you. I did go shopping for this call and bought this vintage design Hawaiian shirt. Based upon viewer feedback, I might actually rationalize why I should get another one. So we'll see.
I think you should. It looks really good. I should have done the same. I like the ocean theme.
Well, thank you. I will send you actually, let's include the link with our podcast episode.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great idea. It's like the Sarni fashion line, you know. And so, anyone listening, please give recommendations for future shirts as well. Now, guys, before we sort of get into the conversation, we did promise a couple of episodes ago to give a shout out for everyone who left 5-star reviews and comments on iTunes. There's been a couple. So let's just quickly give those guys a shout out. There's one from Reckler A in Germany who says, entertaining and informative. I especially like the inspiring topics and personal viewpoints. More ! And a second one from John Grant Water in Canada. Really enjoyed the podcast so far. Looking forward to more. And I must stipulate, he wrote that before he was a guest on the last episode. So just to clarify.
And
he's
Tom,
not reviewing himself.
Yeah, I thought he was going to say, and my favorite episode was,
I would have put that past John, but that was written a few weeks before he came on, just for everyone's information. But well, let's crack on. We're going to go through these 4 topics that we all have been involved in or written about to some extent. But I think a question, Imran, just to kickstart, because it's always interesting to know, and we've covered this before, is it's a bit of a softball question, but how did you get into water? And I think that will give everyone a bit of context as to your credentials and amazing experience throughout different technology companies to be able to sit here and talk about these technologies. So what was your sort of pivot point into water?
And Pratik had a very inspirational story about his childhood and how he recognized the value of water. And I moved to the United States when I was 8 years old, and so water was always flowing. So my journey was more accidental. I'm a chemical engineer. I got out of college and I went to work for an engineering company, and we were building chemical plants all over the world. It was a lot of fun. And I actually got recruited into Koch Membrane Systems, which is still one of the leading companies in the water treatment industry, to do industrial process development, applications development, business development. And while I was there, David Koch one day asked me if I would take on an industrial wastewater line, and that goes back to the year 2000. So that's how I got into it. And now I don't think I ever want to leave, because it's an existential challenge for the world. And I feel good about bringing new technology into play. So I've been really, over the last 20 years, my focus has been a lot on membrane technology, but I've gotten involved with wastewater treatment, with anaerobic treatment, a lot of different process technologies. And I've grown to appreciate the challenges of launching a new technology into this industry. It's not like selling iPhones, unfortunately. But fortunately for me, because I think I've done pretty well at it. So, yeah.
Do you think it's easier to sell iPhones than water technology?
Oh, yeah, because people line up for hours, even though they have a perfectly working one.
I know, right?
I've never had anyone line up to buy membranes.
Maybe that's something you should aim for. Those incremental changes of an iPhone that get kind of accelerated consumer demand.
I noticed you said changes and not improvements, even.
Incremental.
You know what, guys? Let's not go there. Really?
Yeah.
You know,
we can get sidetracked very quickly.
A rabbit hole. Yeah, we should probably avoid this early on.
So anyway.
Cool. Well, interesting. So I think what's interesting about you, Imran, is from the engineering, and then also always worn the two hats from the engineering. So understanding the configurations and how the systems work, through to developing the business, the investment, and kind of the commercial side. So understanding it from a business point of view as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I am an engineer by degree, but I've been more involved in the business development, commercial development, investment side of the water technology sector over the last, 10, 15 years. I've worked for startups, I've worked for established companies, and so I've seen it from all angles. But that engineering background really comes into play because it's critical. I mean, you have to know what the real value is of the technology you're discussing. And that's hard to do if you don't understand the technology.
Very good. So let's crack on. The first trend or area we're going to look at is atmospheric water generation, also known as AWG, or air water capture, AWC. So we're not going to get too bogged down in the acronyms. We know the water sector has far too many acronyms already. But so, Will, I'm going to come to you first, but let's just give a bit of context. So this is essentially capturing moisture from the air, and it ranges from very basic kind of wide nets that you can pin up and collect the dew into pipes, right through to kind of much more sophisticated, digitally analyzed rooftop systems that, again, essentially capture the water and then filter it ready for consumption. But Will, you've done a bit of work in this area over the years, right? And you kind of have quite a good viewpoint of where this market's going.
Yeah, so I'll give you my take, my point of view, and a few stories related to that. I find the technology category really interesting. So the notion that we can tap into another source of water has value to me. I tend to push towards efficiency, reuse, and recycling as a preferred method of extending that last gallon or liter. But air water generation is really, really interesting in terms of what we can deliver to communities that don't have access to safe drinking water. So there's a number of startups. XPRIZE ran a competition a couple of years ago on air moisture generation technologies, and they fall into basically three categories, which is essentially your condensation air conditioner technology. There's the material science piece of it, so using desiccant technology to collect the moisture, and then the nets that you referred to. And some are on grid, so the condensation model is you plug it into a power source and it generates water. and the other two are off-grid. And off-grid, to me, is a very powerful opportunity in the world of water. And I guess for those of you that follow LinkedIn, there was a bit of a back and forth with Christopher Guesson from Global Water Intelligence on the category and the technology offerings and so on. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I did follow up with Christopher and had a really good conversation about the technology category and innovation and adoption of innovative technologies. So I see it as not something that will replace traditional sources, but could it be a hybrid? Could it be something that augments fairly traditional systems? And to me, that's a better way to think about it.
I think from a scale point of view, it's never going to replace traditional like desal, but in terms of perhaps replacing households that are buying bottled water as a more sustainable alternative, I think there's a need in the market for that. But Imran, what are your kind of thoughts on AWG?
I think that it's an interesting technology, and I certainly think there's a place for it. And as you and Will just said, I think it's something that augments more traditional treatment processes. And I think going back to that LinkedIn discussion, which Will brought up, I think the concern, at least for me, with this technology, as well as a bunch of the other stuff we're going to talk about, is the hype that comes around and the overpromising and the people who come in and say, speaking of just AWG, there are people who come out and said, oh, instead of putting in a desalination plant, you should just put in a bunch of atmospheric water generation in the Middle East. And it's that overpromising that can really kill a technology, regardless of the value that it brings. And I've seen that happen many times in my career. But I do think that, going back to these places that are off grid, where they don't have a power system and they need some source of sustainable and clean water, this is a good technology for them.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think it comes down to the use case. It's use case. It's who pays. Might it be an NGO that's really focused on a social mission? It's interesting. The bulk of my work is with industrial clients, and there's a real interest in the technology, at least understanding if there are relevant use cases for them, whether it's a food and beverage company, in particular a bottled water company, whatever it may be. So, I want to go back to the conversation with Christopher, because it was a really good tension between, his point of view and really kind of pulling back on, well, wait a minute, we don't know where this is going to go. It's early stage. There's definitely, Imran, to your point about, technology hype and, oh my God, technology sells itself. Isn't that cool? But let's give it a chance.
Yeah. I go back to that, what is it, the Gartner curve or whatever the blue tech uses, where they say, you have the
Gartner hype curve.
The hype curve. And you kind of plot everything on that and see where things were and where they are now. And it can be a pretty interesting exercise. And the other thing is, launching a new technology in this space takes time. It's not, you're not going to have the final say is not going to happen in 6 months or a year. It's a years long slog.
I think it was a good discussion on LinkedIn, and the various people chipping in. It's a good comment from Paula Callahan from Blue Tech, who kind of chimed in and said, look, this competes with bottled water, not tap water. And actually, and I think both of you mentioned it, in some areas there might not be access to the sea for desalination, or even access to aquifers. So if there's humidity in the air, and you can take and even produce a few liters a day, that's still a few liters a day that those communities may not have. From one single system. That's important to say.
And I actually disagree with Paul on that point, which I'm quite sure will generate all sorts of feedback. But so, air moisture capture, AWG, whatever we want to call it, doesn't necessarily compete against bottled water. There are some instances where air moisture capture companies are framing it as an alternative to bottled water, but it does deliver an option to centralized systems that are challenged to extend their service area. And I think, this is not one or the other. It's probably everything in terms of where this might go, or not go. So it depends who you talk to, I guess.
So it's a valuable tool in the toolkit for countries,
Right.
saying for rural households, for example, that are away from the centralized system and the connected water grid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's move on, because you've mentioned both mentioned the word hype, and I think the next topic certainly lovely little segue there. If I say so myself. We're going to talk about material science, and really with material science, I think we're going to there's various ways we could go. But Imran, you're a membrane guy, right? By and by, so
Yeah, I
in the best possible way.
yeah.
So the one thing that I mean, I've written about water for 10 years, and graphene kind of raised its head over the years. And I think the way it's been reported, I mean, we've all seen the headlines, hey, we've got the answer to water scarcity around the world, graphene membrane, you know, how superior it is over existing polymeric membranes. So I want to kind of maybe start with you on this one, Imran, and kind of the potential of graphene in membranes, and kind of where you think that's going to go.
So I think, listen, the potential is amazing. The technical properties of graphene are fantastic. No question about it. I've seen the research. I've read the papers going back to I guess it was the mid 2000s when there was the first research done. I think some in the UK, some in the US, some elsewhere. And then you had companies, like big companies, I think, like I'm trying to think, like Lockheed Martin and others, who invested significantly in this. And here we are 15 years later, and where is it? And I think this is similar to the discussion around material science. I think on all these technologies is it's a long path to get there. And what people don't really appreciate, I don't think, which maybe I've gained an appreciation for over the years when I've lost all my hair and my beard's gone white, is having a great idea in a lab, going from that to having something that's commercially installed. There are a lot of steps that you have to go through, and I don't think people appreciate that. And manufacturability is a huge one. And I was actually, we didn't have a prep call for this, but I didn't get the topics ahead of time. So I looked up, Lockheed Martin perforating membrane, and if you go to their website, they've still got some great data, but the largest pieces being produced are still a couple of centimeters large. And that's not enough to do a desal plant. I think it'll happen, but it's going to require people to invest wisely. And what I've seen, I think there's a company, G2O, that's realized that, maybe trying to make our own membrane isn't the solution. Maybe the solution is figure out how to apply this onto an existing membrane and get something to market. And I think that's where you see success in the companies that are working on material science, is figuring out what's the right path to get some installations, some niche applications done, and then you build from that. And I think that's where it'll go. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch over the coming years. I think carbon nanotubes are another thing that's fantastic, that's going to have a great future that's related to graphene. But I think there's a path to get there. And the good news is, I don't think, beyond the hype that guys like you created with your write-ups, technology providers themselves.
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry.
My headline was not sensationalist or clickbait at all.
No,
it's just
no. I'm kidding. I'm kidding, of course.
I know.
I think the technology providers here have been pretty careful about not over-promising yet, and I think it's a good sign for them.
A couple of things. This sort of sounds like fusion. Fusion technology is always 30 years out, no matter where
That's true. Yeah.
Right. And there's actually a private equity fund out of Boston, and I believe their name is Material Impact, and they focus on exponential material science technologies, because they believe that that's, one of the big game changers. And I think that's really interesting in terms of, just focus on material science across a number of different industry verticals, whether it's healthcare, water, energy, whatever it may be. But
I think everything has to start somewhere, right? If you think about how many decades ago polymeric membranes have taken to scale up, and then you've got plants in the Middle East, 500,000 cubic meters a day, desalinating water using those polymeric membranes, hundreds and hundreds of those membranes. Everything has to have a starting point. But I think with graphene, you're right, you said a couple of centimeters, and it just makes me laugh when you see the headlines about, hey, we're going to solve water crisis, and it's still laboratory scale and it's the size of a postage stamp. So it's kind of a long way off before commercial full scale application. But I think it's interesting, like I said, it's potentially going to be used to retrofit or upgrade existing materials, which is an interesting part here. But let's move on to ceramics, because your most recent role was actually in a ceramics company. And yeah, so it's a tougher material for membranes, traditionally more used in the industrial space, right? More expensive, higher capex. Shifting into more utility water, would you say, from your time?
Absolutely. I think, I don't know if ceramic membranes have actually been around longer than polymeric membranes have. I actually wrote a little article recently about it, but ceramic membranes were developed in World War II at Oak Ridge National Labs in the US to do some filtration for some materials they were working with there. I'm sure. I think it's still classified, but the challenge was
not anymore.
I think, as you mentioned, ceramics have this. There's a perception that it's much more expensive, and I would say, my previous company, Nanostone, but also companies like Metal Water and others have done a lot to address that challenge over the last, I would say, 10 years. But so I would say graphene kind of is where ceramics were 20 years ago or so. It's got some potential interesting applications. Ceramics forever were used in oily wastewater, heavy industrial waste where polymeric membranes wouldn't work. And I think what a bunch of manufacturers have been able to do is figure out how to manufacture the product at a cost and a volume that allows it to be applied in large-scale water treatment systems. And, I would say now ceramic membranes and polymeric membranes, if you do a life cycle cost analysis over 20 years for a lot of water treatment applications, they're on par, if not ceramics having an advantage. Capital cost wise, I think there's still a way to go, but there's some really interesting things you can do with ceramics that you couldn't do with polymerics. And now, because you're at scale, you're able to try those. I think, going back to my comment earlier about scaling up production, it's not just about getting the cost right, it's also about the volume, because if you're looking to treat 100 million gallons a day of water, you need a lot of whatever it is that you're producing. And if your factory's producing, a couple of square meters a day, that's not going to be enough, and no one's going to take the risk on buying it from you, no matter how great it is. So you have to figure out how to phase that increased production capacity with the projects. And that's the real challenge for someone managing one of these businesses.
Quick question. Probably a long answer.
All it might have been so far, I think.
I'm always fascinated by the process of innovation and commercialization. Probably everybody is to some degree. But what are your thoughts in terms of how do you accelerate that process? What has to change in terms of going from, lab scale, pilot to commercial? I mean, do we need to change the funding piece of the puzzle, the stakeholders that are involved, better business models, use cases? I mean, this is your world. I'm interested.
Yes. The answer is yes, all of those things. I think a lot of it
you sound like a consultant. Wait a minute.
I kind of am right now. Yeah, I think, the real issue sometimes happens. Somebody's got a great idea in a lab, but they don't know how to get it to, how do you engage with the customers and understand the real need? And I think that's what's lacking in a lot of these companies, is really understanding what are the needs of the customer that I'm trying to solve. And if you have a clear understanding of that, it becomes easier to get funding, because you can go make the use case to your investors and say, hey, listen, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. Here's why I think I can solve it. Help me get there. The other thing that happens too often with these companies is they do get something semi-commercialized. And that's another big gap, is like, all right, so now we've got something that we can kind of sell. Let's go sell it to everyone and see what happens. And that doesn't work. And I think that's a place where I would use Nanostone as a good example. I mean, we really focused in on, let's find the right niche market segments and just focus all of our efforts on those. And it helped for us that we had a product that didn't have to go through the capital project lifecycle, because we had, going back to what we were talking about graphene earlier, like going after replacing existing technology where a lot of the infrastructure is already built. Now I can implement my little piece in a little subset of it. I think that's another thing that really helps, rather than just chasing after greenfield projects, because those take forever. And no matter what your technology component is, out of the overall cost and schedule of the project, it's so insignificant.
Right. This sort of gets to the, who's the competition conversation, which is generally the status quo. It's not your competitor in the same space.
No.
It's basically the installed base and status
Yeah.
quo. So how do you create a compelling business model that helps you scale with focus?
I think the other thing I would add is, it's figuring out, the other thing is to make sure you have the right client base, because as much as the water industry gets slammed for being too conservative and not willing to take risks, there are a lot of people in this industry, both on the industrial and the municipal side, who are really interested in implementing new technology. And figuring out how to get in front of those people and spending your efforts with them as a technology provider, I think is critical. Because I'm not going to name any utilities, but you can beat your head against the wall against some of the large utilities in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere and get nowhere, because status quo is what they want. But if you go talk to some of the innovative utilities in Southeast Asia and Australia and Europe and in the United States, they'll help you solve, they'll help you with figuring out how to commercialize your technology.
Right.
That's something people should take more advantage of.
I think we've been doing some sessions recently, like coffee break sessions with some startups, and one recently was saying you need to find, and I hate to use the word influencer because it's a pet hate of mine, that word, but the equivalent, and that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
Tom, I want to hear you say more about that.
I think we should do a dedicated episode just on the role of the influencer. But no, the CEO is saying, look, you need to find, and you put it well, Imran, those influencers, those individuals, consultants, utilities who are willing to take a risk. And it's just getting in front of those people from a startup and getting the data from that installation can make the startup between going on and then 2 or 3 projects after that.
And I mean, the other things I would say about this, like, you get that influencer, to use your word, the term that we use within NanoSun was leading utilities, for example. If you can get 1 or 2 of them to implement the technology, then the other guys, nobody wants to be serial number 1, but a lot of people are happy to be serial number 3. And that's the trick, is getting those first couple of references.
I've heard that, yeah. People want to be first to be second, right? That's the expression. First, let someone else take the risk first, and then we'll follow in their footsteps.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, let's move on to the third topic, digital solutions. Will, I mean, this leads on from our previous episodes. We've looked at blockchain, we've looked at AI, we've looked at smart water, but it's quite a broad portfolio. But this time we want to look at satellite data and analytics. So this is a really interesting market with use cases in terms of detecting leakages on clean water. I did an interview with a company, one of the core players in this Utilis in China, about moving from drinking water into sewer breaks. But Will, you've done some really interesting projects in this space as well, right? So tell us more.
So I am a huge fan and a firm believer that satellite data acquisition and analytics is an incredibly powerful subset of digital water technologies and the whole digital transformation trend that we're seeing accelerating under the pandemic. And, just think about it. I was on a call with NASA this week talking about how to better connect NASA data to use cases in the industrial sector. And it's an incredibly powerful movement right now. So you've got companies that can measure, can quantify water quality data on a real-time basis using satellite data coupled with very limited on-the-ground sensors. You've got satellite companies that can predict floods, can analyze landscape characteristics. And that's really, really valuable when you compare it to the old-fashioned way, which is, I'll send out a person with a measurement device periodically and give you data that will put in an Excel spreadsheet, nothing against Excel, of course, that we'll look at once in a while. And, I really got hooked on this before I started doing some work with TNC Techstars, but then really, really got involved with a few companies that are very much in this space and connecting them to industrial clients that I know. And it's an absolute aha moment in terms of, oh, gee, I can really measure water quality at the watershed level for my input water, but also for the communities in which I operate in. And, happy to name names, but I think this is a big deal in the world of water right now, in both the, public and private sector.
In terms of, because the cases from what I've seen, you can look at from coupling it or pairing it, like you say, with sensors or additional data to look at aquifer levels, as well as you're saying the quality of water, as well as there's cases of water utilities using it to pinpoint where treated water is there's a leak break, and then
Right.
you need to pair that with something else to fine tune it to detect, to actually figure out where exactly that leak is. But I think there's some really, really interesting cases coming out with this technology. Imran, what have you sort of read or been involved
Yeah,
in
I
this
mean,
side?
I think what you just brought up, I think is a really important. So I don't know how many years ago it was, like 10, 15 years, 10, 12 years ago, I was at a conference and somebody was talking about non-revenue water. And as a person who has been focused on technology, like I'm trying to sell a piece of equipment that treats the water. And I never really thought about all of the challenges of pipelines. Like I live in the city of, outside the city of Boston, and we have wooden pipes in parts of Boston that were installed back in the, I don't know, 1800s. And there's a lot of water loss. And I think that ties into this. A lot of streams I'm going to try to bring in here. So give me a second. No pun intended on the stream. You've got the non-revenue water issue. You've got the issue of people currently with the COVID crisis not being able to pay their water bills. The utilities aren't making any money. And if there was a way to save half of the non-revenue water, it would be tremendous. And we have this data now. So I actually read a use case, trying to remember which city it was, that mapped their network using some satellite data, figured out where the leaks were, and were able to address them at a cost that was insignificant compared to actually trying to figure out where it was, and recovered a bunch of water. And I think that's the kind of combination of technologies that we need to I mean, we have a lot of data available. It's just how do we use it? I think you guys have talked about that in the last two editions of this, of the episodes of the stream. I think this is another place where it really comes into play.
Imran, don't you think the term non-revenue water is a really polite way of saying mostly leakage?
Leaks. Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm a water professional, so I have to use the right term. But yeah, it's leakage. So when I was a kid in Pakistan, I don't remember a lot, but I do remember non-revenue electricity as being something where someone tapped into the line and got the power. But non-revenue water is just leakage. It's busted pipes. It's hydrants that are leaking. And I think you could even tie it into, actually this gets into our next topic, is like, how do you measure your wasted water in your house? Mm-hmm. But I think at the utility level, it's a really powerful data metric. And I've also read about industries using it, because I think industrial customers now are recognizing that they play a part in the community in which they are. So if they can get that data and help the community, that would be tremendous. I know, Will, you've done some work on that, so that would be interesting to get your side as well.
Oh yeah, I think the boundaries between use cases and what's important for the water, wastewater utilities and industrial clients is really blurring quite a bit. I mean, you look at leading multinationals that have a very robust water stewardship, water strategy. They're looking at issues that historically we would just say, well, that's a public sector issue. That's an NGO issue. And, now they really legitimately care about water quality and access to safe drinking water and sanitation and hygiene, at the watershed level in the communities in which they work in. And, the ability to leverage satellite technology, remote sensing in general, to give them a better read on what's going on before it happens, is incredibly powerful and incredibly cost effective. So it's, like you said, leak detection using satellite data. It's infinitely better than ripping up a street in Manhattan or
Yeah.
Boston, just for fun because you have a leak. It's better to know where it's going to happen and shut it down and then deal with it. So I don't know. I think the whole satellite data acquisition analytics piece from a, leak detection, quantity perspective and quality perspective is a game changer in the scheme of things.
And I think it's very early days. I don't even think that we understand all of the stuff we'll be able to do with this data once we start collecting it. I think it's interesting. I think the COVID crisis has forced people to start looking at. Before this happened, most of my meetings were I got on a plane and flew somewhere and sat in an office, and now I realized I can do it with my gym shorts on, just wearing a decent shirt.
Don't break the illusion.
Too much information. We thought you were wearing slacks and lace-up shoes and all that.
I haven't worn lace-up shoes at least in 4 months.
On that note of Imran shorts, let's pivot to the last point. And actually, Imran, you did a really nice segue to the smart water home. Actually, so I think this is a really cool area, and I think the Consumer Electronics Show, the CES show in Las Vegas, is always a good barometer of say the public appetite for tech and where it's going. And I wrote a piece recently about some 4 or 5 top innovations being shown, and a large focus was on the smart water home. Now, a lot of these devices are, I noticed there's a trend to kind of almost detecting moisture in the air and then automatically shutting off someone's house in case, to basically, if someone's out shopping and there's a leak and they don't want to come back to a flooded basement, this app connected technology would basically be an automated valve that would shut things off and then you'd get a little alert. Very cool. But I think this area, we've talked about it in terms of empowering people with data, the digital citizen, it brings all that in. And I think this smart water home could be really interesting. I just wonder if there is the appetite for it on water. I mean, I know on power, sorry, that's the chime of my local ice cream man, bang on the time. Just a bit of an introduction.
What are you going to get?
I can get you guys cornettos. I'll run out and be back in a couple of minutes, right? No,
sounds great. I see this as, another major trend. I mean, look at it. We've moved towards, smart homes with respect to energy use, or smarter, not incredibly smart. And water's the next, brave new world. And, you're looking at fixture companies, you're looking at entrepreneurs move into this space, everything from, water quality testing on a real-time basis at the tap to, leak detection technologies that are appealing and value added to the insurance sector. I think it's a very, very exciting space, in part because you're bringing in outsiders that care about flooding and water quality and so on. And, Tom, I think you touched on this, which is, democratizing access to data and actionable information. You don't necessarily have to go to your utility anymore. I will know what I'm drinking before I put it in my mouth.
I'll know how much I'm consuming, and I'll know that. Right. I think that's going back. I mean, you mentioned, the smart power and now water, but 15 years ago, nobody was thinking about a smart home in regards to power either. And I think it's a natural progression, and it makes a lot of sense.
I think
as a person whose basement was I'm sorry.
Sorry, Imran. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think from the power side, it seems to have accelerated much more quickly, because I think about years ago, I automated my central heating system, had the app on my phone, and I was on a trip in Singapore, and my other half sent me a message, said, I can't turn the heating down. I brought up the app, turned it down by a couple of degrees on the app, literally from 8 hours away time zone. I thought, this is amazing. And this level of control, just there seems to be more appetite for it on power. But I like to think now, from what I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show, more people want access. They want to know, like you said, consumption. They want to get alerted if there's a potential leak in the house. So I think this will drive the uptake of technologies and new players in that space that you mentioned, Will.
And this also ties into the hydration sector in general, which is, historically we've delivered safe drinking water in a bottle, in a package, and at the tap, and giving people the ability to understand water quality coming from the tap and make other choices, whether it's a in-home air moisture capture system, or, an in-home, hydration technology that delivers, flavors, carbonation, while assuring that your water is safe. So, as much as when we teed up this conversation today, it was, categories, all this stuff sort of bleeds together in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
It really does. It really does.
I think it does. I think that's the other trend I think that I've seen in the industry is this, everything kind of tying together, which years ago, if you were a membrane guy, you were a membrane guy and you didn't worry about anything else. When I first got into this, there was membrane companies just made modules, sold them, and people who sold faucets just sold faucets. And I think what we're seeing, I think one of the players in the smart water home, I think I remember which article you're talking about. I think I read it, was a major supplier of household products. It wasn't like somebody from outside coming in. It was a company that's been established in household plumbing for at least my entire life, and now they're trying to bring this stuff into play. And I think that's what it's going to take for it to be successful.
Yeah, and they have that established base, the brand that people know, and then it's giving them a competitive advantage over the other companies in the market.
Yeah.
But I think, democratized access to data and also control. I mean, you mentioned, Will, about hydration, but the ability to control your environment in your home, design of water, that whole market comes into this as well. But I think there's much more to come on this smart water home. But cool. Well, gents, we've come to a decent milestone. Any final comments from you on those 4 trends we've reached?
The only thing I would say is this is for everything we spoke about, except for potentially ceramic membranes. This is very early days, and it's exciting to be in the industry today when we're looking at so many various innovations that are going to come to play. And there'll be other stuff that comes in. Some of this may not make it, but I don't hold the opinion that the water industry does not innovate. I think we do. We just do it in our own way. And I think we're doing it faster than we've done it, at least in my lifetime. And I'm looking forward to being involved in it for as long as I can be. So.
Great. And Will?
So 2 things. I think most folks have seen, one or more of my presentations, for better or for worse. And, I have one of my favorite quotes from a science fiction author that, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And Imran, I think it gets to your point, which is that, you know what? There are water utility companies that are bleeding edge in terms of how they're thinking about innovation and adopting technology, and there are industrial clients that are doing the same thing. So it's not black and white. It's not that the utility sector, the public sector lags, and industrial clients are leading the pack. It's really messy, and innovation is pretty messy. But we need to keep pushing. And then probably the more important question is, I'm quite sure the viewers want to know what we've been drinking.
Well, no? I'll tell. I'm having a Hendrix and tonic. I'm having a Hendrix and tonic with cucumber, and the ice is melted now, so it was better at the beginning.
All right, I'll go next, and then Tom, you're going to be at the top. Absolute Elix vodka with olives and an ice cube, and I really like Absolute Elix because they have a partnership with Water for People, so a percentage of their profits go to an NGO that delivers safe drinking water. And I love the taste, love the bottle, and I love what they do. And that was not a product placement. That was very sincere.
Very good. Thanks, Will.
And both you guys are laughing now. Like, Yeah,
No,
right.
listen.
No, not at all. No,
I mentioned I like Hendrix, and it has nothing to do. I have no idea what they do in the water industry. I just like the way it tastes.
it just tastes very good. It tastes really nice.
Yeah.
Well, this was a gin and tonic, a Japanese craft gin called Roku Gin.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Really nice
that,
with
yeah.
Fever Tree tonic. Beautiful drop.
Yes, of
But
course.
there's no ice and there was no lemon, but luckily the tonic was chilled. So
Yeah.
it's been enjoyable to have a drink with you guys, have a chat, talk through these topics, and to close things out for people watching or listening, make sure you subscribe, share the stream with your friends and family and colleagues. Leave, if you can, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and we'll give you a shout out on the next one. And make sure you keep eyes out for the next episode. We're going to be interviewing Mike Zelkind, who is the CEO of 80 Acres, which is a vertical farming company that claims to use 97% less water. So really interesting chat coming up about the sustainability of food, water, and the wider nutrition discussion. So gentlemen, final cheers, and thanks again for your time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Both of you. Be well.